Hello and welcome to Quest Givers. Today we're going to talk about why min-maxing sucks.
If you haven't watched any of our videos in the past, we suggest that you click that subscribe button and the bell to receive notifications. Because this channel is all about being a little bit different to other channels that talk about RPGs. Most RPG channels will talk about how to build specific stuff and the specific mechanics of D&D or other games. We speak generally about role-playing games and the various different aspects of those games. So this video about min-maxing, we're talking generally across the board in RPGs, but obviously D&D being the most well-known, we will obviously reference it heavily.
Min-maxing is about mechanically making your character, the best it could be, but not just that. It's more about exploiting the rules to just make, devastating characters or that kind of things. Or you can always hit the win button, and just avoid stuff, which, that's not really fun in an RPG. You want that challenge, and if you're kind of almost defeating yourself, I feel, if you do min-maxing where you just hit that, auto win button.
We are very much all about storytelling. So, we put out modules on our website, questgivers.com, and we talk about those as examples in here. And so for us, story is the most important element in a role-playing game. And min-maxing causes one particular problem, and that is in most TV shows, movies, computer games, things like that, you fail more than you succeed. So when you're min-maxing and you're succeeding more than you fail, the story becomes boring because you auto-win, essentially, as Scotty was saying. You're pressing the win button the entire time. So nothing ever really goes wrong. And when nothing goes wrong, there's no reason to then propel the story forward. If there's a boulder that's going to come rolling down behind you like Indiana Jones, and you just turn around and just fireball it because you've got the best fireball you've at level 2 or whenever it comes into power in your game, and you just blow that thing up, that basically eliminates the problems that the DM is supposed to be putting in front of you, because that's the DM's job. The DM's job is to create problems for the role-playing characters to overcome. And if you can overcome every single problem by just hitting the win button with min-maxing, the story becomes ridiculous. And then you'll whinge and complain about how the game wasn't that interesting.
The characters getting better and able to overcome more challenges isn't really min-maxing, right? As their power level escalates, they're able to overcome more challenges. But the thing is, you want to balance those challenges with the difficulty that will be appropriate to the characters. Like if characters come into abilities where they can levitate and fly and that kind of thing, you want to have challenges where, there are places where it's not just a normal dungeon, where there's big drops that they have to use those powers, they have to utilize those powers and that kind of thing, where a normal party would be almost impossible to traverse. Your party can do it, but you're using up resources. So that's not really min-maxing when you're utilizing those abilities that you get. And some games, the power curve is much bigger than in other games. If you're playing, a gritty kind of fantasy game, you're not going to have, access to wishes and, flight and all that kind of stuff. But, if the players are using that in their game, you're not really min-maxing to get past all those challenges. Your challenge as the game master or DM is to just keep creating challenges that make them use up those resources so that they're not just super powered all the time. If you just let them rest and they become super powered all the time, you're basically letting them min-max because they're getting all their abilities every single time that any kind of challenges come up.
I would liken it to the comic book superhero Superman. When Superman was first introduced, he was as fast as a speeding bullet or a high-powered locomotive and could leap over tall buildings in a single bound. And as his character progressed through the 50, 60 years that he's been in existence, his powers became he can fly, he can reverse time by spinning the planet backwards, He can shoot laser beams out of his eyes. He's ridiculously strong. He can pick up a Boeing 747 with no problem. The issue that comes about is this is where characters are when they're at like level 20, right? And this is a problem. Superman is a very, very big problem from a writing standpoint, is because there's nothing this character can't do. There's no problem that can't be solved by just like picking up the planet and throwing it. Essentially, he's become a god. And there's no kind of problem that can really be put in front of him. So what they have to do is they have to create these problems for other characters that he has to swoop in and solve. Like in Superman, it's always all the other NPCs in the story that are the ones that all the problems are happening. It's Lois Lane falling off the building, or there's a massive crack has opened up in the earth and he's got to try and close it back together because it's going to kill a small town. Nothing actually affects Superman. It only affects the other people in the game. And as a DM, as you get to those higher levels in Dungeons and Dragons and some other games where you've got this sort of power sort of vertical diagonal sort of thing, this power creep, you then are creating these sort of characters where you need to then do things to people that they care about. But the problem is, if you haven't had a story where you've built NPCs that the characters care about, they're not going to give a shit. And so if they don't give a shit about the world or the characters, when they become godlike status, everything's going to fall apart. It's not going to work. And personally, I don't agree with games that don't start at level 1. I don't think that games should start at like level 6 or level 10 or whatever. You should always start at level 1, because you haven't got that caring about the world built into the character from the very beginning as a lowly serf or as a lowly sort of shit kicker on the space station. You haven't got that if you start 10 years in. You've lost that struggle element and the caring for the world, and then when they become godlike characters, they don't give a shit. So
story makes that makes the game much more interesting than just the mechanical abilities firing off, right? When the players care about the story and they care about the characters in the story, that kind of puts the kibosh on that kind of stuff, because it becomes not just about the mechanics, and that's how you want your game. I mean, it's fine for players to care about mechanics and work up good combos and everything. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, really. But it's just when you do those kind of killer, kind of almost rule-breaking moves. And I see a thing that new DMs can do is they can say yes to some of these rule-breaking combos, not realizing how much it's going to break the game, right? And then they're like, then they realize several games in, it's just like they're hitting the win button every time, and now I'm in trouble, right? So be really careful when you do that, right? Really careful when you allow these kind of killer combos, even in the rules, because they're not always intended that way. And the players, of course, they're going to make a case that, of course, it's intended that way. I thought of it. Haha, I'm genius. I hit the win button every time. But the rules aren't really intended to be that. Like Gareth said, there's a lot of failure in the game, and that makes the game more interesting if you have a lot of failures in your game, right? But if you're hitting that win button all the time, that is not the way any game is intended to be. It is not. It's intended to get over more difficult challenges, but it's not intended to win every time. So that is definitely min-maxing, and you guys need to watch out about that. And hey, don't you do it, player, right? I'm telling you, don't do it.
Tim Kask, who worked in the original D&D, who's got his own YouTube channel, he said in an interview once, and I remember it very clearly, he said, they designed the rules up to level 6, level 7-ish, maybe level 8, because that's where they used to play, and that at that point they would then start to retire characters because they then bought a castle, and and so the characters would be retired into the world. So in the original rules of D&D, that's kind of where the stuff used to kind of end. And then people say, oh, we want more levels, we want more levels. So they just arbitrarily tacked on another 14, 15 levels to get to level 20. And then, they even did books that, like, the epic characters that are beyond level 20, which are absolutely ridiculous. And, that's where all these computer game sort of things come from, level 100. It's mind-bogglingly silly. But what's very interesting is if you've played a lot of D&D and a lot of different games that are based on D&D, because D&D is really like the DNA of role-playing, right? It's like you can't create a game or you can't play a game without it being compared or thought of in a D&D way. But so you notice that when you get to level 6 and 7, that's when kind of campaigns kind of slow down and people start to lose a little bit of interest in the game. That's really the point where it starts to become ridiculous. The rules push it on. Now, when you min-max, right, and let's say you have a level 1 character that you've min-maxed and so that you can really operate it almost like a level 2, level 3 character, what you've done is you've shaved off 2 levels from that. So your character is going to become uninteresting by like level 4 or level 5. And so you're doing yourself a disservice. You're doing the story and you're doing the rest of the party a disservice by doing this, because that really is the point at which it kind of it begins to plateau and fall off in terms of interest in the game. And veteran players in the comments, like, tell me if I'm right or if I'm wrong, but veteran players will tell you that's pretty much where most campaigns kind of like that level 7, that's when the wizards become ridiculous. That's when the spells become a bit too powerful. That's where it really sort of hits that kind of mark. And that's because in the DNA of D&D, that's where they used to finish. And so that's where it should really finish, is around level 6 or 7.
And it becomes easier, I feel, to kind of min-max as you get those levels. The more levels you get, the easier it becomes to get, like, rule-breaking synergies. Where one player is doing like 300 points of damage and another player is doing 20. It's really easy to get those kind of synergies the more levels, and so that's the danger. So just be aware of that. Be aware of that. It's not a straight plateau up, right, Gareth? it's like a big jump up because of all the synergy of the rules that you can get going and the ways you can kind of utilize those rules to just kind of break the game. So yeah, just keep that in mind if you want to run the higher level games. Know the game. I would recommend that new game masters and DMs don't try to run a game you don't know, right? And make them like 10th level, because you're going to have a really hard time with that game. So make sure when you run these games that that's the kind of the point of starting low level. You learn the game as you go. Even if you're a new DM, you're learning the game as the rules are presented to you, and the characters get more powerful. You're learning those synergies and how to counter them as a DM. But if you just start out with this crazy amount of rule synergy that they can generate by min-maxing, then you could be in trouble. Like, your game could end up really just boring, where you wanted a super epic game, right? And you don't get the super epic game. You get the boring game because they're just destroying everything you did. And that's another thing, not to harp on D&D, but with the CR, I never follow the CR, particularly at higher levels. It breaks down. It just throw it out the window. As a DM, I know what my players can handle, and I just stock appropriately or put the danger level appropriately. If I just use the CR on my group, they would destroy everything that they encountered. So don't depend on the CR. The CR can be a starting place, but don't depend on that for creating your game and making appropriate challenges, especially for the characters that have the chance to min-max and get the synergy going.
If you're a new DM, right, play the rules as written. It's going to be less of a headache for you when you're playing the rules as written. So I would say at least the first 10 to 15 sessions that you run, play it as it's written. Don't try and say yes to everything. Don't allow characters to use some fancy new rules off the website or off some new book that's come out. just use the standard rules, play the standard game for at least 10 to 15 sessions, especially if you also are playing with new players, because you're going to get bogged down in the rules early on, and the game is going to be a little bit slow and awkward and that kind of stuff. So when you're starting at level 1 and it's simple and the rules are simple, it means that you can focus on the thing that excites people, which is the story. And you can focus on that story, and you can focus on the less mechanics and more story. So focus on a good story first, and then work your mechanics into it, and that will give you and the players a better experience. All right. And once you've got that better experience and you become experienced with the rules, you can then bend them, add new things, and start to go off on the different paths. And one of the things that I always liked when I first started playing D&D is we always just rolled 3d6 for each of the stats, and those are the numbers that you got. And then you chose a race and a class, which I don't believe in classes, but then you picked a race and class based on the numbers that you had, right? Whereas now the whole paradigm has shifted, where you kind of choose the character that you want to have, and you kind of just put in the values. And there's actually something that's lost from that, because doing it the other way, you're kind of forced to play what you've got, all right? Which you then have to solve the problem of your character. How do I, with a character with 3 strength and 4 dexterity and 15 charisma, how do I make this character effective in a game, right? How do I solve the problem of my own character? This is what makes the character more interesting. If all the characters in the party all have maximized everything, the wizard is maximized, the fighter is maximized, the cleric is maximized, the thief is maximized, everyone's maximized, there's no flaw. There's nothing that can possibly go wrong, right? You've got the solution to every problem in your party. And the problem with playing that way is that, you're just hitting the win button again. you're just sinking the ship before it's even left the port. You can tell them I'm quite passionate about this.
I'm bad. I allow the players, to assign their scores. I want them to have the character they play. I want them to be a reasonably good character, and so I personally don't consider that min-maxing, where you can adjust, you can make the character, put the stats where you want, make the character you want. I'm not such a stickler for that. I allow players to do that. But then if you do that, it's going to be a different game than what Gareth's talking about. Because if the players didn't have a choice, they're likely not going to be maxed out, and you're going to have to run the game that way. You're going to have to think of the game that these characters aren't maxed out. But if these characters are starting in a really good, position for those type of characters, think about that when you run the game, because you're going to have to adjust stuff. You're going to have to make the stuff stronger. Maybe it was 3 goblins, now it's going to have to be 6. Because they're starting out, in kind of I guess a bit of a DM sanctioned min-maxing, right? So, just take that into account.
Yeah, I'm passionate about it. I've written a whole system that basically you don't roll the character, you kind of just pick what you want to play, and that gives you bonuses. To me, that's what D&D is. Essentially, character creation in D&D is going the long way around. To me, it's like roll 1d6, and those are your positive modifiers. Just place them in the stats that you want the positive modifiers. That's just 1d6, so you get up to between 1 and 6 positive modifiers, and you can just place 5 in strength and 1 in dexterity and 0 the rest, or 1 in each if you roll a 6. Or if you only roll a 1, you get +1 to dexterity or +1 to intelligence or whatever. Then you apply your racial and class modifiers, and away you go. That speeds up that process, and it's like, essentially, that's what you're doing. That's what you're doing by rolling all these dice and then just discarding the 1, and you just get rid of all that rubbish and just roll 1d6 and choose. because that's really what you're doing.
With that, a lot of modern games do take that philosophy, but D&D has this history. It has, here's what D&D was, and so that stuff needs, like the hit points and that kind of thing, that stuff needs to be in there, so I think that's why it's in there. But another point I wanted to make is, you know, characters will come up with ideas in the game to utilize powers that aren't necessarily like the way the power is intended, and you think about how you want to treat that. I don't consider that min-maxing, because if a player wants to use a power that's not conventional, they're not taking the rules and putting them together to get like some killer combo, right? Or some kill button. They're like, oh, I'm in this situation. How can I utilize the abilities and powers I have to get out of this situation? And I've had players come up with creative ways to use their abilities and spells that aren't necessarily the way you would use them. But think about it, how does it work in the game? Is this going to break the game, right? If I allow this in my game, if I allow them to do this, is this going to break my game, or is it just going to be cool? I like the rule of cool, but you know, you also have to think of the rule of cool in terms of balance, which is min-maxing, the dangerous end of just trying to combo the rules to get killer, you know, to get win buttons, as opposed to using your skills in creative ways that make the game more interesting, right? So for an example, we were in an ice cavern, and my wife is playing a sorceress, and she has Firebolt. And she said, oh, can I like... And Firebolt is a cantrip, so you can just keep casting Firebolt, right? There's no restriction. It's not like a spell where you have to rememorize it, right? So she was like, oh, there's an ice cliff. Can I like just kind of do little bursts out of my hands and like make handholds, you know, to climb up the ice cliff? And I thought that was really an interesting idea, you know, that didn't really break the game. They ended up actually going the other way because there was opposition at the top of the cliff, and she was like, got up there and was like, oh crap. So it actually made it more interesting. It made the game more interesting because she's like up there alone, nobody else is up there, you know, and I was like, oh no. So yeah, that made the game more interesting. It may not be the way the spell was intended, that way Firebolt was intended, but you know, I reasoned that a sorcerer could, you know, like, oh, I'll just do a little bit of fire out of my hands and just kind of melt the ice and make an ice ladder going up the cliff. And so I think that you can think of ways like this. I also do like Dispel Magic, because Dispel Magic is kind of like an on or off effect, right? I actually use Dispel Magic to great effect in the game as a temporary Dispel Magic. Like, you know, there's certain magical effects that are built into a room or something that may not be able to be dispelled, right? Probably not. They're like they're super powered. But how cool is it to, you know, have the magic user allowed to temporarily dispel the effect, and then you can get across the obstacle, or you know, maybe something else comes up and you have to fight that, or you have to do that, but at least you've got this. And now it's like a race against time, because we got to get out of here before the effect comes back on, right? So that makes the game more interesting, and to me that's not breaking the game, you know. And you know, it just adds flavor and fun to the game. So, you know, if a player asks and you're an experienced, you know, DM or GM, you know, think about the ramifications in your game, right? Because that's very important. You're setting a precedent here, right? When you say yes, you're setting a precedent. So think about, do you want to set that precedent? And if it's not going to break the game, like, you know, why not? Why not allow them, just use the rule of cool and allow them to do something neat, you know, with their abilities that maybe it wasn't intended that way, but it just gives the game that much flavor, and it adds interest, it adds something interesting to the game.
You know, part of the reason why we even created this channel, you know, and why we seek people to subscribe to this channel is like we want to put out there the things that like don't really get talked about a lot. You know, this is sort of the glue that holds this whole thing together, right? You know, lots of people talk about min-maxing and how to do it and how to apply it to various characters and whatever, but should you even be doing it in the first place? You know, this is where we're talking about sort of the philosophy of role-playing rather than the actual specifics of it.